in organizations. We're trying to do this webinar more like a meeting in the sense that video cameras and mics are there. We can actually see each other. So Nicolay, we leave it to you to tell us to interrupt or not at all, or when. And we look forward to the exciting session. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are brief questions, feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, if there are more complex things, we could perhaps do at the end. So my name is Nicolay Worren. I'm an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences in their business school outside Oslo. And thank you, Fanish, for inviting me to give this webinar, and to Ruchika for handling the practical details. This is a topic that I've been interested in for many years. I worked as a consultant for 18 years before I went into academia 5 years ago. And already when I was a consultant, I was experimenting with different approaches to understand and map and hopefully also reduce complexity in organizations. So what I was planning to do during the next 90 minutes was to cover 3 perspectives on this. The one is what I call the functional perspective. So meaning that we start with a top-down approach, trying to understand the mission, strategy, the unit goals, and so on. The second is the work process interdependency approach, or the information processing approach, which is well known in organizational theory, of course. And the third one is what you can call vertical complexity, so complexity related to the hierarchy, the reporting structure. I'll spend most time on the 2 first perspectives, and maybe only 10 minutes on the last one. And we have 2 exercises that I have prepared. They should take between 7 and 10 minutes. So it's going to be a busy session. The group exercises are condensed versions of exercises that I'm using in my courses that I teach on this topic. But I wanted to start with a drawing, actually. Sometimes when I meet managers, I ask them to draw their organization. So I give them a piece of paper and a pencil, and I ask, why don't you draw the way you are organized? And this is how one executive did it. He is the head of a Scandinavian subsidiary for a large US consumer goods company. And we only had 20-minute chat, but even though we only had 5 minutes to draw, this is the drawing he produced. And you can see here that they have lots of units, that there are several dimensions, there are some dotted lines indicated, etc. So this is where I think we have to start, with the reality that people in organizations are confronted with, and not with the theory. But we should start here, and then we can look at whether there are theories or frameworks, methods that can help people manage in this setting. And it's clear from several surveys that have been done that this is a concern among many organizations. So I have collected, I think, 7 or 8 surveys done by consulting firms with hundreds of managers around the world. And a consistent finding is that people perceive that the level of complexity is high and increasing. And secondly, that this is related to the way we are organized. So the organizational design has something to do with it. So that's what we're going to explore here. Now, before I go on, I thought I will talk a little bit about definitions. So what do we mean by organizational complexity, or by complexity in general? So there is an everyday way of understanding this, or the way we understand it in everyday language. And that is that we tend to consider a simple system as one that has few elements And a complex system is one that has many elements. So, with this definition, if you have a product with 3 components, it's simple. If it's, 13 components, it's more complex. By the way, this also seems quite similar to what many scholars do, actually. So if you look up in various academic articles, you can see that this counting of elements, which is quite a common definition, actually, whether it's number of locations or number of hierarchical levels or number of jobs or services and so on and so forth. So I would argue that this is like a proxy of complexity. It's not the real complexity, even though it's used in many academic articles and even though it's used in some leading journals. So for example, the one on the left here is from Organization Science, and the one on the right from an economics journal. So I would argue that this is complicatedness. It's not complexity. And one reason for that is that you can easily imagine 2 systems with equal number of parts, but with different levels of complexity. And I will show how when you see the different perspectives later. But the other downside, the other weakness with this way of defining complexity is that it seems to be some kind of absolute measure, so that you can count and then you can find some level of complexity. But what managers are concerned about, I think, is not complexity per se, but it's unnecessary complexity. So they have the impression that it's increasing and that some of it may be necessary because there are many different customer segments, many different technologies, markets, and so on and so forth. But some of it is also self-inflicted. So we need a definition that can take care of this. So this is one that I would propose as a tentative one, at least, where we say that a necessary complexity is a situation where the same outcomes could have been delivered faster, with higher quality, with lower costs, or with a higher degree of certainty if the organization had been structured differently. So this means that we need some kind of idea of an alternative way of doing it compared to the one we have today, and one alternative way of organizing things that could deliver the same functionality, the same outcomes, but with less cost or faster, or also maybe with less stress for employees. And I think that the perspective that I will present may actually be able to do this. So let me then go into the first one, but are there any questions so far that we should address? No? So let me go into what I call the functional perspective, or the perspective where we talk about goals, strategies, missions, and unit mandates. So here we have a different definition of complexity to start with. And I will give a specific example here of what it could be, but there is a whole theory behind it. And if we consider a federal agency, which has a mandate, it has been shown that some federal agencies and other institutions, other organizations as well, have conflicting mandates. On the one hand, they support a target, but they're also mandated to constrain the same target. So for example, after the Mexican Gulf oil disaster, it became known that the agency that regulated the oil business in the Mexican Gulf was also responsible for attracting investment to the same industry. So this means that there was an inbuilt conflict in the mandate of this US agency. And in the research by Kerrigan of more than 200 federal agencies in the US, he shows that actually 1/3 has a mandate which is conflicted. So meaning that they support the same target that they constrain. And he also shows by with very systematic research that this leads to employee confusion, which in turn leads to lower performance, 20% lower evaluation scores of the programs that these agencies are responsible for delivering. So this is an illustration of the definition that the former MIT professor in engineering has proposed of complexity. So that complexity is something that reduces the probability of reaching your goals, basically, because fulfilling one goal will undermine another goal. So how can we apply this approach? Here are some diagnostic questions that I would propose. If we're dealing with a new organization or with our own organization, we should ask, what's the mandate or mission of this organization? What is it supposed to do? And then we can drill down and we can look at the main departments or units, or division, whatever you have, and ask what are the mandates of each unit? What are they supposed to achieve? What are they supposed to deliver? And then the question is, can one unit work to achieve its goal or fulfill its mandate without that having a negative effect on another unit, and vice versa? So if you do this kind of pairwise comparison, you can create a whole matrix with potential conflicts between the unit mandates. And this in turn, we can then formalize as a set of functional requirements. Like in engineering, when you develop a set of functional requirements for a product that you want to develop, you can also formalize this as a set of functional requirements for the organization. So this is one example here for a project I did myself a few years ago for a bank, where we defined 5 main functional requirements for this large bank. This was then broken down into 35 more detailed functional requirements. And all this was then mapped to the different organizational units, so we could see which unit was responsible for fulfilling which part of the mission and the mandate. So this is what I had planned, covering regarding this perspective. I now thought we can do a brief group exercise. And I won't ask you to organize a whole organization or a whole firm, but just a children's orchestra with 15 children and 1 conductor. And I will read it to you, but you will also see it afterwards in the groups. So a conductor leads a string orchestra with about 15 children. Initially, the children are quite small, around 8 to 10 years. Most of them have only played the violin or the cello for a couple of years before they join the orchestra. They practice every Thursday at 6 p.m. For the first year or two, the conductor selects simple pieces. But as the children grow older, he discovers that they're able to play and enjoy playing more difficult pieces, including orchestra pieces by well-known composers. However, some of the children quit the orchestra and new and younger members join, which forces the conductor to return to the simple pieces again. The conductor then discovers that some of the older children are bored because they're not given more challenging pieces. So I have prepared a form in Google Forms where you can respond to 2 or 3 questions regarding this. I will send you this. I will send you this link in the chat box, so you can hopefully see it here. So when we go into the groups, only one person needs to respond on behalf of the group. Okay? And the idea here is to try to apply this functional perspective, because I found that this perspective is very useful, but it also takes a bit getting used to think in terms of functions. So this exercise I use with my students as one of several exercises to try to be a little bit formalistic about the functions of an organization. Okay, so then I think we are ready to be divide it into groups if everybody has the link, and we can spend 7 to 10 minutes on this.
You can tell me when to bring them back.
Yeah, so let me see. I see some people are not in the groups, but they maybe didn't want to. I think we're on schedule so far.
Yeah.
What did I say? Ruchika?
Yes.
You can also maybe visit a group or two just to get the sense of the progress and tell me, if they need a couple of more minutes. So far we're on schedule, so it's not a big deal.
So should I also send a message that they need to submit their responses?
Well, we'll give them a few more minutes. I thought, we're still, let's see, I'm still on schedule here.
Right.
So we have, we can use 5 more minutes if they need it.
Would have, which would be like, okay, have a be enthusiastic about playing in orchestra. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but these two are definitely in conflict. You cannot have both. But how could the conductor reorganize the orchestra then? Split it into two groups.
Right, but how to?
Okay, so
sitting on each
so
group.
if we look at the functional requirements, and as we have been discussing, it could be either learning or it could be performance. So learning for the younger ones, even for the older ones, learning higher order pieces, and performance. And when we look at learning, then the learning is of two levels. One is the lower level learning and the higher level learning. So
Are you in the group, Yashwant? I can hear you. Yeah, I think you're muted.